Hi, I'm Picasso with the Eagle Riders MC of Sin City, and I'm here with
Hollywood, Black Patch, Las Vegas.
Cool. So here, it's an age-old question, right? Is how many bikers does it take to screw in a light bulb? Yeah, no.
Well, I'm gonna say 5.
5. Okay.
Is that a good guess?
That's a good guess.
Okay.
I think it's also true for how many people it takes to start a club. So
Yeah,
that's actually the
definitely.
topic of our video today. So how many people does it usually take to start a club? It depends really kind of on who you talk to. Generally, the rule of thumb is 5 to 7. I think if you're starting a club with anything less than that, then it's not really a club, really. Generally, it's kind of like gets into, the rules of order where, you want to have a quorum and you need to have a volume of people for that. But generally, if you're going to look on starting a club and you're really committed to this, you've done your research, you may have already talked to a few of the dominant clubs in your neighborhood or in your area rather, and have gotten permission to start a club. Maybe you have a name, maybe you've got a patch already laid out, and you've got permission from everybody that you're supposed to, and you're really committed to starting a club. How many do you really need? Well, a lot of times the 1% clubs, when they're asking you, when you're kind of petitioning to start a new club, they're going to ask you is how many people do you have right now? And if the answer is 2, they're probably going to say like you're not a club, right?
Exactly.
It's 2 guys. But
and I mean it should be, in essence, 5 officers. It shouldn't just be like you guys are going to have a position.
Correct.
If you're starting a club.
Right. It doesn't necessarily, generally a lot of clubs that I know, when they get asked this, it's usually 7 because they want to make sure you have a board and some members that are not board because if everybody gets a trophy, right? So it's, we don't want to have that.
So you kind of mentioned just, and I was looking up to make sure I wasn't quoting it wrong.
Yeah.
So the Robert's Rule of Order. So that's basically the framework of where this kind of comes about. I mean, it's part of any kind of government, any kind of organization. And I'll just read right here. The framework that is comprised of a set of codes and rules of ethics that help groups hold orderly meetings that allow the majority to rule while allowing minority voices to be heard. I mean, typical government, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, that is literally how clubs are run. Any kind of organization is run in a form of a government.
Yeah.
And you need those officers and that certain amount of people. 5 makes it so there's no ties.
Right.
That's an important thing.
And there's an important distinction on who determines the ties. So we'll get into that in a second.
Yeah.
And that's it. And by the way, that book is an incredible resource. I'll put a link to it on Amazon somewhere in the description. But I highly encourage our sergeant at arms to make sure they always read that. It's good for any board members to read it. It's great for when you're having church, when you're having your club meetings to keep order. And it's a great resource just because it really does help keep you on track. It doesn't, and it's a great thing just for organizing.
And that can
things.
be a problem when you have a bunch of people. Can be arguments or debates, and then now you've spent 2 hours doing nothing, and that helps. It's basically the rule of order, keeping order, and part of that is having people that are going to say yes, no, this is how we got to go, and so forth. There needs to be some sort of lead
system of organization.
Yeah, there you go. That's a better way to put it.
So talking about the officers that you need and what specific 5 people. Before we even get into that, though, please be sure and like and subscribe to this channel. Click on the little button down there. It really helps support us a lot. We really appreciate it. So the 5 people you should be looking at, and it's some of, I guess, kind of to a degree common sense, right? So you need a president, right? That's generally the head of your organization. We'll come back to him in a second or her. You're going to need a vice president. And so I heard a great line about vice presidents today. I was listening to some talk radio, and it was the gist of it. They were saying is that just because you're next in line doesn't mean you're second in charge. And it's an interesting point. It's a very interesting distinction.
That.
We'll get into that in a second.
Keep that.
It's a great line,
head.
right?
Yeah.
Just because you're second in line doesn't mean you're second in charge. And then, of course, you're going to need a secretary,
3,
right?
Yeah.
Secretary is it sounds kind of like a joke. I'm the secretary, but secretary of a club is actually extremely important.
We kind of joked about it in the preview about they kind of do more of the work, or
the hard work, right?
of
Your
the
secretary
work.
and your treasurer, they're doing all the heavy lifting, right? But secretary of a club is very, very important. Aside from keeping documents and keeping minutes and all of that, the secretary is also responsible for the legal elements of the club. If you're an incorporated nonprofit, their name goes on the business license. They're required to be there for signing of checking account setups, all that kind of stuff. Secretary is actually an extremely important position. Next, and in most respects, they're technically third in command of the club, sort of.
Yeah,
Depends on how clubs are set up. But a lot of times
I wouldn't disagree with that. Yeah.
And then after that, you're dealing with your sergeant at arms.
Well, treasurer,
treasurer
I guess
too,
in order, yeah.
Yeah, I
Gotcha.
would go sergeant, and a lot of clubs I know see the sergeant arms. Kind of getting back to what we said earlier, you can perceive a lot of how clubs are set up that your second in charge is really your sergeant at arms. It's not your vice president, and we'll get into those roles later. But the sergeant at arms carries an extremely important job in the club, and it on the glance it sounds like, well, they're just in charge of keeping order at the club meetings, but they're actually the main point of contact for the club. So if a club is reaching out to you for some reason, their point of contact within your club is your sergeant at arms. It's not the president, it's not the VP, it's actually the sergeant at arms. And their sergeant at arms should be contacting your sergeant at arms. After that, then you get into treasurer. And the treasurer, again, does the workload, right? Because they've got to keep the books in order, make sure that monies are accounted for, make sure like whenever we have church, we declare exactly what's in the checking account. We talk about what our expenses are. So that way there's never any impropriety or people feeling that there's officers stealing money, because that's happened.
Transparency.
I hear about
definitely.
that story a lot, actually, where officers are just kind of stealing money from the club.
They're using the club for financial benefit.
Right.
So go back to the president. The way I've always been told, presidents break the tie, vice presidents are the face of the club, and sergeant at arms basically do all the rest of the work.
That's pretty much it, right? I mean, that's the truth, right? But the president, I always say, as the president of my club, I kind of joke. It's like I like to think that I do the least amount of work, but I do a lot of stuff that nobody else in our club can do. So I do a lot of our media work, and that's my background, right? So I do a lot of that kind of stuff, our graphic design work, anything that else we need in the media arts. I handle a lot of that stuff. But that's because I just enjoy doing it, and that's for that reason. But the president, technically, they're the face of the club, and to it, kind of like what you said with the vice president. But they're like the head of the club.
Yeah.
But the reality is that when people are contacting your club, they go to sergeant at arms. But as the president, my job is to and by the way, we're going to do a whole series of videos on the complete breakdown of every office.
Because they're detailed.
They're detailed. But the president's job is there to basically provide guidance and break ties.
Yeah.
So when your board when you have a board meeting and they decide on something to present to the club, if there's a tie, the president has the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
But generally, the presidents don't vote. A lot of people don't realize that, but the presidents don't vote usually.
And I would say the president also is, I wouldn't say the decision maker, but they're still the lead of like, this is the direction we need to go. And then
I look at it as more like, without calling anybody else sheep, they're more the shepherd kind of the club.
That's a good way. I get what you're saying.
They're there to kind of provide the guidance and move in a direction, but they're not there to. And any president that runs a club with an iron fist is not a president. That's a good leader, right?
That's a dictatorship, right? Or whatever.
And
so that's a pretty good rundown of most of them. There's a lot of other, if you want to call them officer positions, out there. I've heard pros and cons, negative comments, positive comments about each one. You mentioned a historian could be one.
A road captain is important.
Oh yeah.
Once your club starts growing, now
how can we forget that one?
We have, but a lot of times those are they are not necessarily voting officers. They might be like non-voting appointed officers that the board appoints.
Yeah.
But usually you would appoint like a road captain is your strongest rider usually, right?
Yeah.
Our road captain is awesome. He used to be road captain for the hog groups and stuff, and he's great. He's a very strong rider. But a lot of times you might have non-voting officers be like you had mentioned, could be a tail gunner. So somebody, if once your club starts pushing into larger numbers, you need people to help out with
to manage it. Yeah. So that's a good example of that. But the five are the president, vice president, secretary, sergeant arm, treasurer.
Yeah.
And those are the core. Like you kind of just have to have those. I don't think there's a way around it at all.
That's really it. If you're going to start a club, that's what you
need those. And if you don't have those, people are going to ask you questions. Why don't you have those?
Right.
And then also like just your club integrity of, if you don't have those, how are you even running a club?
Right. You're not a club at that point.
I have seen positions being combined.
Secretary,
for
treasurer,
whatever reasons. But there's a lot of other auxiliary officers, like you said, tail gunner, not necessarily an officer, but that's
a pretty rare one. I
mean, I've seen a lot, or even like you said, road captain isn't necessarily making decisions on the club, but you sure as hell better listen to him when it comes to ride safety and stuff.
Right. So like our road captain, we always say that you're the most important person when we're rolling.
Yeah, exactly.
So when bikes are in motion, he's in charge.
And it's different with every club. Even the road captain is up there with the president.
Yeah, our road captain he leads our rides.
Yeah. So they're not in the back, because of the lower end of the officer group.
Not at all.
No, they're the ones actually in charge
running
of
the
that
ride.
moment. Yeah.
And you can even have things like we have a clubhouse, so we actually have and it's again non-voting officer, but we have a quartermaster because we need somebody to get supplies, make sure the place is clean,
exactly.
you know, and
That's a
their
good
job
point,
is
too.
a quartermaster,
Yeah.
right? And so we have a queue.
But so maybe we can do a video on the auxiliary positions.
Well,
with
we will. Yeah, it's on our list.
Yeah,
so,
the core is that 5, and if you don't have that, you don't have a club.
You're not a club.
Sorry. So I think that kind of does it. We'll do those other videos.
Yeah,
and
so we're gonna do another series of videos where we break down each individual position. So be on the lookout for that. That's coming down the pike. So very good. I think we're good.
Can I have a shot yet?
We'll do a shot.
I'm
Yeah,
waiting.
awesome. Our traditional thing here. Okay, cool. Oh, that's not good.
Catch you on the next one. Biker Protocol.
And be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. It really helps us out and helps us bring you more videos. So thanks again for watching.
Thanks.
We'll see you on the next video.
Take care.